Oh, here we go. Much better.
We were sitting there like, where is everyone? Did nobody know we were just completely in the wrong spot?
I got the message that you were at some other meeting.
We were in a different room.
What?
We were in a different room that only the two of us had the info for, apparently. So, but I'm so glad to see that everyone else is here. Welcome.
Hi.
There's a couple of people who I don't know super well, so I'll just introduce myself. My name's Stephen Scher. I am the membership manager at RS. I started right before Rosh Hashanah, and due to COVID, I have not had a chance to meet everyone yet face to face, but I'm happy to be here. Welcome. And it is my great honor to introduce Rabbi Rachel Pass, who will do a little intro and then take us through tonight's Torah Queeries. And Rabbi Rachel will be with us tonight and again on the 18th of January.
Today, whatever that date is.
Yeah, 2 weeks from today. All right, so take it away, Rachel.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It is nice to see/meet all of you. There are a few people I don't recognize from the two other times that I've subbed for this class. So I might ask just as we go to introduce yourself, share your name and pronouns. If you have questions or whatever, I'll give my little spiel that I have given before, which is I prefer when classes are a discussion. I sort of live by, don't tell anybody, but it's actually a Lutheran piece of wisdom. But I really live by this piece of wisdom, which is no one of us knows more than all of us. And so as we encounter the text that we'll look at, I just invite everyone to bring whatever lens you have, whatever thoughts, questions, comments, anything, that it makes for a livelier conversation and we all learn more when we learn together. So we will start with a blessing, which I will not forget this time. The blessing for the study of Torah, which ends with La'asok b'divrei Torah. So please join with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So let me share my screen. And we are looking this week at Parshat Bo. Oops, we are not looking at my coloring book. How did I do that? Are you all seeing Parshat Bo? Can I get a thumbs up? If yes. I'm seeing one thumbs up. Great. All right. So we are seeing the doc. Excellent. All right. I have put you all on my screen so that I can see most of you. And also the text, but I can't see your names when I'm screen sharing. So if you have thoughts or questions, either use the raise hand function, which is under reactions at the bottom of your screen, or just unmute and start talking. So we're going to be looking at this week's Parsha, Parshat Bo, which is a pretty fun one. This is the end of the plagues and the beginning of liberation. And we're going to be looking at it. We'll read through the last 3 plagues and then the departure. And then we're going to be looking at that in comparison to the Stonewall riot as catalyst for queer liberation. So let's get started. Does somebody want to volunteer to read in the English, please, from the beginning of our Parsha, chapter 10, Exodus 10, 1 through 6? Is that Muriel? Is that volunteering? Great. Let me ask you to unmute.
Hi.
Hi.
Then, starting with then the Eternal One said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your child and of your child's child how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am the Eternal One. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Eternal One, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. Then they shall cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither your fathers nor fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what do we got? Here we have, sorry, I'm just making it smaller and scrolling back up a bit. Our seventh plague of locusts. Does anything from the text like strike anyone? Did anyone have any thoughts or comments?
Well, one comment is, how did they ever get that far? How did they withstand the first six and come to this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I I think about both the concept myth, I hope, of like a frog in boiling water doesn't notice that it's boiling until the last moment, right? That like it gets worse and worse and worse until it's too late. And I also just think about, and especially at this time of year, like I've been thinking about the past couple of years and how things are getting worse and worse, and yet we're still here, right? We've now survived 2 rounds of pandemic. We've survived so many, it's just, I can't even begin to think of like how many effects of climate change. We've survived political turmoil, right? And then there's still some left standing. And here comes the next thing to knock them over. I'm really struck, and maybe it was Muriel hearing it in your voice as like such a kind and genuine person. I was really struck with how mean God sounds in this. God says like, like, I made a mockery of the Egyptians, like that you may recount to your child and your child's child, like how much I messed with you all. Like, I don't know, that sort of struck me the wrong way a bit. Did anybody else hear that, think that, pick up on that at all? I see one nod.
It was a very immature thing to say for that person.
Interesting, thinking about an immature God. There's a theologian, her name is Dr. Mara Benjamin, who wrote this beautiful treatise. It's a Jewish care ethic, essentially, in which she understands the relationship between the Israelites and God as a parent-child relationship, with the Israelites being the parent and God being the child. And having God as like a dependent baby, and entering the covenant, which is only a few parshayot away now, is like becoming a parent, that you don't really know the child you're given. You don't really know the God you're given until you have that child. And so it's interesting to think, to sort of use that frame and think of God as like a childish God here, saying like, you're messing with my parent, you're messing with my people, like I'm gonna just destroy all your stuff, right? Like when kids like knock over like Lego, like I always think about like the kids that build stuff just to knock it over, right? That like this feels a little bit like God just like trying to knock over the Egyptians over and over again. I also think that there's some sort of parallelism here of like, I'm going to do this so that your child and your child's child will know. And then over here we have like something that neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen. That there seems to be a sort of all encompassing of the generations of like, this God is greater than all of time. Just a interesting thing to think about. Anyone have any other comments, questions before we move to the next section? Yeah, I see your hand up. Okay, first, sorry, I can't.
It's Ben Friedman.
And then
we're all familiar with the phrase, let my people go, but there's more to it. It says, let my people go that they may worship me.
Yeah.
So it's there's a purpose, there's a reason for the freedom.
Yeah.
For religious freedom.
And we'll see that comes up again. It is about religious freedom, which is actually a really excellent point to bring up in thinking about, we're going to get to the Stonewall riots in a little bit and talk about queer liberation, and what the point of that, like sort of, if there's like a let my people go of queer liberation, like what's the second part of the sentence that we don't have? That they may worship me, that they may experience pride, that they may be free, and we'll see this that they may worship me comes back up with the other plagues as well. Wesley, I believe.
Yeah, it's Wesley. I was struck by the way that it's like Pharaoh's heart that's hardened, but that the locusts would affect the whole population of the Egyptians, and how we're affected by the choices made by people who maybe are in charge, even if we're not in making those decisions.
Yeah, that like it's Pharaoh's heart that is hardened, and then there's this other class of like his most upper class courtiers, but yet the people who will be affected, yes, it's them, but it's also everybody else. Right, like the surviving remnant, and the surviving remnant here is not necessarily metaphor for individuals, but is also a metaphor for individuals.
Yeah, I was thinking of where it says they'll fill the houses of all of the Egyptians.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was struck at the very beginning, the very beginning of the Parsha, that the Eternal said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart. I find that very interesting, that Pharaoh might have relented, but God wanted to display more signs to him first.
Yeah, I think that could be read as going back to sort of the childish God, the immature God, who's like, I'm going to make Pharaoh say no so I can show off all of my magical powers in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that it can be a real theological difficulty, right? Like God is somehow making it harder for the Israelites to achieve liberation. And it can also be seen sort of in the opposite way of like even the oppressor is hardened and hurt by oppression, And this is in liberation theology, which comes out of South America and Black liberationists, there's a really pervasive idea that that oppression of any kind not only hurts the oppressed, but also is a dehumanizing of the oppression of the oppressors. I'm thinking about Paulo Freire's, sorry, I'm saying that wrong, pedagogy of the oppressed, who talks about dehumanization of all people in any case of oppression. And so thinking about, like, in some ways, we're seeing that, like, Pharaoh is dehumanized by his oppression of the Israelites. Yeah, Ellen.
Yeah, so along with that, I read an interesting explanation that when there's like a mind-body connection, and when you act in a really negative way, it can have physiological consequences. So it could be that Pharaoh literally, his heart got hardened. He got ill. He was sick from his own bad treatment of the Israelites. So God, in the way that God has created our bodies, created the opportunity for this mind-body connection.
I really like that. And I, just to like reveal a little bit of my personal life, like one of my New Year's resolutions is to do a little bit of like mindfulness in my body and be aware of, like, where do I feel stress in my body as opposed to just in my mind, or where do I feel joy in my body? And so I really like that reading of thinking, like, here we see like Pharaoh's oppressing, Pharaoh's evil literally hardens him. It literally hardens his heart. And like, where I wonder if we'll see in this parsha, or maybe next time, like, I wonder if we'll see anywhere else where we can see sort of the inverse of that. Or if you can even, I can't really think of an example right now. I definitely have first day back of vacation from Vacation Brain, but an example of sort of the inverse, like when joy is expressed physically. Actually, I'm thinking about in the Psalms, you turn my mourning into dancing, right? And that dancing is a physical expression of joy in the body. There, maybe I don't have Vacation Brain so bad after all. All right, let's hop down to our next plague. Does somebody want to read for us? Our second plague. Or eighth plague, I guess. Ninth plague? Ninth plague.
I think Steve has his hand.
Oh, who? Sorry?
Is that Steve Muirman?
No?
Okay, sorry.
All right, I'll read. But the Eternal One stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the people go. So here we are again with the hardening of the heart. Then the Eternal One said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be a darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched." Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. So here's our plague of darkness. This might be a bit vulgar, insensitive, inappropriate, but this is my favorite of the plagues. I thank you for those who laughed. I am fascinated by the concept of a darkness that can be touched. that one could not even stand from the weight of the darkness. Yeah, Benzion.
Well, darkness means we can't see the other person. If there's one thing that's true about us, Homo sapiens, our species, that we are social. We are social animals. And if you can't see anyone else, it's definitely stress, a punishment, a very negative state of affairs. So this is a real plague, not to be able to see another person. That's what I had to say.
Yeah, Benzion, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, I don't know how bad it is in Philly right now, but we're essentially in a lockdown here in New York. I mean, anyone who's COVID conscious is staying home, or who can and is COVID conscious is staying home right now. And I'm hearing in your words some of that, like this is a darkness that can be touched. Like we are in that isolation is a very heavy darkness. Yeah, and I'm thinking about like this as opposed to the locusts. Like locusts are gross. Like I can imagine, like from horror film, right? Like bugs crawling up my walls. And like, yeah, that's terrifying. But the darkness, I think for me, I think is the scariest of the plagues, or is at least the heaviest. And I say that knowing what's coming next, which is also a horrible plague. I see Karen gesturing at me like, you know what comes next, right? Like it gets worse. Any other thoughts? I see Stephen Ellen, you still have your hand raise function up, but I don't know if that was from before.
Well, it seems like the plagues are a progression, each one getting a bit worse, but they're all so deliberate in terms of God not really allowing Pharaoh to give in. It's deliberate to impose one after the other and to keep Pharaoh at bay so that that's possible.
Yeah.
Well, in a fight like that, in psychological terms, you have to constantly be escalating if this behavior you're seeking has not been shown. So then you have to escalate your behavior. So you're trying to trigger the other to escalate their behavior. That's what I was getting from that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's also like it's interesting to try to be compassionate towards Pharaoh here, right? Like Pharaoh doesn't have choice in the hardening of his heart, right? God is doing that to him. And yet Pharaoh has also enslaved a whole people. And I think that that's sort of an interesting question to ask of like, what, like to, in the light in which we see, that was a bad one, the lens through which we see Pharaoh, as like, we see him as this evil oppressor. And also like, here is our God who is doing evil to the Egyptians, who is hurting the Egyptians in horrible ways. And not enabling, the opposite of enabling, disabling, there we go, Pharaoh from having any sort of compassion. I'll just say in my defense, I don't work Mondays. And so this really is my first day back from vacation. And also I'm just not good at word recall anyhow. So here we are. All right, let's hop on to our next plague. Who wants to read? the ultimate plague?
I'll read. Moses said, "Thus says the Eternal One, toward midnight I will go forth among the Egyptians, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And there shall be a loud cry in the land of Egypt, such as has never been or will ever be again." In the middle of the night, the Eternal One struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go worship the Eternal One as you said." I have a question though. Was it just first, like the firstborn, or was it firstborn sons?
It was the firstborn sons of each of these people, which is, well, I'm pulling up the Hebrew for a second. Yeah. So Zachar ben Shana.
Well, it doesn't say sons, and it does speak of firstborn of the slave girl. Well, this
It says
the slave girl. I see.
I also, for a second, when I saw the firstborn of the slave girl, I thought it meant the firstborn slave girl, but it's the firstborn of her. And it says Zachar ben Shana Yehiya Lechem, so the masculine. It's it's like the battle within me of like, you know, if the US instated the draft, women wouldn't get drafted, and like, you know, it's one of the perks of anti-feminism, I guess, and is also I don't know that it makes this any more or less palatable. It's, I think, just truly horrific. And I this line hits me. There shall be a loud cry in all the land of Egypt, such as has never been or ever will be again. That we really here are given insight into the pain of the Egyptians as this plague comes down. And thinking back to Wesley, what you said earlier about like God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh makes this decision, but it affects everyone and every person. Excuse me. And then we also have, was it Ben Sion? Was it you or who noticed this? The go in order to worship the Eternal.
I'm sitting here with the women's commentary, and they designate, they say, and they have in parentheses, male firstborn in the land of Egypt. So.
Yeah. I wonder, do they say anything in the comments about?
I was looking, I don't see a comment about it, but they have that in there in brackets.
Yeah. Yeah, Ellen.
So there's a really interesting commentary by Rabbi Gail Labovitz. I don't know what and she says it's problematic, this thing about the firstborn male. She said, because it might be really confusing who was the firstborn if there was more than one wife. It might be confusing who was the firstborn if the firstborn had died in one of the previous plagues. Then what happens?
I had not considered that. I had considered the thing about multiple wives, but I hadn't considered that of like, what if one of the firstborn had died in one of the earlier plagues?
Yeah, so she just makes the point that it's really problematic what was going to happen here.
Yeah. There's a really haunting Edgar Carrot story, which is about Edgar Carrot is a modern Israeli, contemporary Israeli, I guess postmodern contemporary Israeli writer. He writes mostly he writes fiction, but he writes mostly absurdity, and he's written a very powerful. I'll try to pull it up before the end of the class and send it out. Story, which is this last plague from the perspective of an Egyptian family, and in it there's like a question of like, did the mother cheat on her husband, and like which kid is going to die, and it's the story ends up being, I mean, unsurprisingly horrific and haunting. But I'll see if I can pull that up. I don't know if I have a good English translation. But as you were saying that about like multiple wives, I was thinking about that story.
Sorry, I'm still kind of stuck on God hardened his heart.
Yeah.
And it keeps, and what keeps bumping into my brain is God can't harden my heart. No matter what God does, God cannot harden my heart. Only I can.
Yeah.
I mean, we proved that we didn't, but it's proven that premise is proven by Job, no matter what was thrown at Job. So I don't think God can harden the Pharaoh's heart.
I don't, if we want to read it as maybe God couldn't do that, then what might be the point of the writers including that? Like what might we be trying to learn from this fiction of God choosing to harden Pharaoh's heart? Because I think you're right. I think that I mean, I don't know that I have ever experienced feeling an emotion that I felt came from God or the universe or the divine, right? Like I think that what happens in my life is in as much as possible my own control. And so I wonder, I mean, maybe it's compassion. Maybe that's what we're, oh, Ellen and Wesley, yeah.
So I was thinking that the more we're in relationship with God, then the more we are able to experience God and to act consonant with God. And the further we are away, then the less ability we have to feel God's presence. So Pharaoh was the furthest away, perhaps, from God that you could possibly be. And I wonder if that's sort of metaphorically what it's getting at here.
Making sense to me.
I like that. I like the that like Pharaoh was so far removed from God that there was no connection. I think that's also an interesting one to consider, that the Egyptians understood pharaohs to be gods incarnate. And so what might it mean to be like so far from what our Tanakh envisions as like the one true God, that you act in evil ways? Wesley.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you said about like liberation theology, and what it would mean for Pharaoh to sort of acquiesce in what he would be admitting, in doing that, and how, like, if an emotion is coming from within him, how he might be resistant to understanding the world in that way, or viewing himself as having enslaved people, and the difficulty of admitting something like that about yourself, especially, I think, if you had said, after the first plague, you'd been like, oh, I'm not gonna go with this, and then that happened, how hard it would then be, 7, 8 plagues in, to admit you were wrong, and that all of that suffering had been because you didn't want to admit that.
I like that. I think that that works really well in congruence with what Ellen was saying, right? Like the wronger Pharaoh is, the more he digs in, the more he like pulls back from his humanity, the more he continues to dehumanize himself by dehumanizing not only the Israelites and their enslavement, but now his whole people in letting these plagues happen, or creating a scenario for these plagues to happen. Steve, was that a new hand up?
Yeah. I wonder why all the firstborn of the cattle was included. Was the thought that the cattle meant more than the firstborn humans to the Egyptians, or it seems superfluous to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. It makes me think two things. One, I think just the loss of food supply from cattle. And it also makes me think about at the end of the book of Jonah, when God and Jonah are having this like essentially philosophical debate where Jonah's like, you will save the people of Nineveh. I can't believe you did that. Like, I want to die. And then God's like, are you kidding? And then God like gives him the gourd, and then it goes away, or like the plant situation for shading, and it goes away. And Jonah's like, I can't believe it went away. Like, I want to die. And God is like, are you kidding? Like, should I not care about the people of Nineveh, who number X amount of people, and also their cattle? And that's just like how the book of Jonah ends. And it's also, people always ask, like, that feels a little superfluous. Like, what? Why the cattle? Is that supposed to be a joke?
No, they're very expensive.
Yeah, it's true. They are.
They're worth a lot back in that day.
And I think that there's also something of like for our religious purposes, like we would use cattle in sacrifice. And so I wonder if there's something, if there's meant to be some religious overlay that we don't understand, of an understanding of Egyptian religion, or if it is meant to be the loss of livelihood as well as the loss of life, and knowing that like the understanding is that in the loss of the firstborn, like they were the one who should receive the inheritance, which would include the cattle. And so I wonder if there's something to that as well.
Well
all right
said.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and move us into our Stonewall comparison. And so this is hold on, I need to adjust my screen for a second to be able to see. So this is sort of what I thought as I was reading through the Parsha and seeing these. I was understanding, like, as we've said, like the plagues progress and they get worse and they get worse and they get worse. And finally, this last plague is the catalyst, is the finally Moses, well, finally Pharaoh is like, all right, get out of here, go worship your God. And so from there, we have the people scrambling. They make the matzah, they go to the sea doesn't part, then the sea does part, they cross it, they get to the other side, and then they have 40 years wandering in the desert of struggle and complaints and failure, until they finally get to the promised land. And so I was understanding like this moment as being a catalyzing moment, but not the final moment, right? They haven't yet crossed the sea. They haven't yet made it to the promised land. They haven't yet received the covenant, but they've had this really big catalyst of like, we're finally getting out of Egypt. And so I was thinking about Stonewall and the gay liberation movement, the queer liberation movement, as we now in hindsight call it, in which there was a lot leading up to sort of catalyze liberation. And Stonewall is really held up as a symbol, just like departing from Egypt is held up as a symbol, right? Like when we do the Passover Seder every year, we commemorate the plagues, we commemorate the leaving. We don't commemorate the arrival. Like we commemorate the leaving of Egypt, this catalyzing moment, in the same way that pride marches all over the country, especially here in New York City, celebrate Stonewall, celebrate the catalyst of the queer liberation movement. And so I brought for us sort of a history of Stonewall, a brief history, and then a first person account. Oh, and here is Stonewall pictured in 1969. And so I was going to have us read this and sort of look at the comparison. Does somebody want to read? You don't have to read all of it, but the beginning of history.com's really nice brief history of Stonewall riots.
I can begin it.
Thank you.
The Stonewall riots, also called the Stonewall Uprising, began in the early hours of June 28, 1969, when New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay club located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The raid sparked a riot among bar patrons and neighborhood residents as police roughly hauled employees and patrons out of the bar, leading to 6 days of protests and violent clashes with law enforcement outside the bar on Christopher Street, in neighboring streets, and in nearby Christopher Park. The Stonewall riots served as a catalyst for the gay rights movement in the United States and around the world. When the police raided Stonewall Inn on the morning of June 28th, it came as a surprise. The bar wasn't tipped off this time.
I'm just going to interrupt you for just a second here, is that I left out a big chunk here just for time and space, which is that police raids at gay bars in New York City and all over the country at the time were very common. As many people know, that the police would constantly raid and clear out gay bars as a form of harassment. And so here we have, when the police raid, it's a surprise, whereas usually they were tipped off. Okay, you may continue.
Armed with a warrant, police officers entered the club, roughed up patrons, and finding bootlegged alcohol, arrested 13 people, including employees and people violating the state's gender-appropriate clothing statute. Female officers would take suspected cross-dressing patrons into the bathroom to check their sex. Wow. Fed up with constant police harassment and social discrimination, angry patrons and neighborhood residents hung around the outside of the bar rather than disperse, becoming increasingly agitated as the events unfolded and people were aggressively manhandled. At one point, an officer hit a lesbian over the head as he forced her into the police van. She shouted to onlookers to act, inciting the crowd to begin throwing pennies, bottles, cobblestones, and other objects at the police. Within minutes, a full-blown riot involving hundreds of people began. The police, a few prisoners, and a Village Voice writer barricaded themselves in the bar, which the mob attempted to set on fire after breaching the barricade repeatedly. The fire department and a riot squad were eventually able to douse the flames, rescue those inside Stonewall, and disperse the crowd. but the protests, sometimes involving thousands of people, continued in the area for 5 more days, flaring up at one point after the Village Voice published its account of the riots. Though the Stonewall Uprising didn't start the gay rights movement, it was a galvanizing force for LGBT political activism, leading to numerous gay rights organizations, including the Gay Liberation Front, Human Rights Campaign, and GLAAD, formerly Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and PFLAG, formerly Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. On the one-year anniversary of the riots on June 28, 1970, thousands of people marched in the streets of Manhattan from the Stonewall Inn to Central Park in what was then called Christopher Street Liberation Day, America's first gay pride parade. The parade's official chant was, "Say it loud, gay is proud."
Thank you. So here we have an account, which I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'll say it now and sort of review for just a second. Written by History.com from the History Channel. It was written by History.com editors, which gives an account of Stonewall. And one of the things that I noticed in reading this and then in hearing you read this is how much of the language is going to differ from the next thing we're going to read, which is a first person account of somebody who was there. That there's, right, we have like the raid sparked a riot. There were violent clashes, like they just like inciting the crowd, they dispersed the crowd. Like in this, the catalyzing moment was an officer hit a lesbian over the head as he forced her into a police van, which is sort of like a mythic. It's sort of like a myth of queer history, is that like here was this lesbian woman being shoved into a police van who incited the crowd to fight back. That is one version of the myth of Stonewall. There's another very popular version of the myth of Stonewall, which is probably a truer myth of Stonewall, that Marsha P. Johnson threw the first stone, a Black trans woman. And then we have like a lot more language of like riot and that it's this language of chaos and also sort of like uncontrollable. And I wanted to note that in thinking about sort of the Egyptians versus the Israelites, sort of versus God in our story of like whose account we're reading and whose pain is chronicled in both our text from our Parsha and also from this. The last text we have is from the Reverend Irene Monroe, which is a first person account of Stonewall. Well, and actually, before we read this, I just want to give like a trigger warning. I don't think that there was anything from the excerpt that I took that is particularly, but I want to name that she writes very honestly about what she saw, including some of the horrors described both above and elsewhere in her piece.
Do I raise my hand? Or just
Do I hear somebody who wants to read?
Yes, I will read.
Thank you.
Coming out of the subway station at Christopher Street, we could hear the commotion, the shoving, the pushing by both protesters and police yanked 3 of us away from the core group. We were left to fend for ourselves. As the momentum of the crowd pushed my small group to Waverly Place, the block away from Stonewall, we witnessed 2 white cops pummeling a Black drag queen. "I should shove this stick up your ass," said one of the cops as he pulled up her dress with a nightstick in his hand. The taller of the 2 cops yanked off her wig and laughingly tossed it to the other cop. In spotting us, the cop who caught the wig threw it at us, yelling, "You nigger fags, get away." The wig missed and landed about a foot away from us, but the cop's word hit striking fear. When I look back at the first night of the Stonewall Inn riots, I could have never imagined its future importance. The first night played out no differently from previous riots with Black Americans and white policemen, and so too, it's being underreported, but I was there.
Thank you.
As much as I see.
Yeah, that's what I brought.
Okay.
Thank you. This account is one of the few first person accounts that I found that was written by a person of color. And I find it very sort of the language that we get and the images that we get from her account are quite different from the accounts written by white people. And I would like to highlight something that she says, which we know to be true today, particularly in the wake of summer 2020 and the summer 2014. But that it played out no differently from previous riots with Black Americans against white policemen. It was underreported. And that it was really people of color, queer people of color, who were on the front lines of Stonewall, on the front lines of this catalyzing moment. And you can see really the difference in the story and in the language from this account to this account. And thinking back to our text of the Israelites versus the Egyptians, and right, the Israelites are sitting there happy in their, where was that? The Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings, right? Like the Israelites are sitting there happy and warm inside, while outside there's a cry in all of the land of Egypt, such as never been heard or will be again. And thinking about sort of these parallel stories and how we highlight the oppressed and the oppressor, and what are those different levels, right? Like here we have God hardening the heart of Pharaoh, God making Pharaoh one who can have no compassion. And yet the Egyptians are the ones who are punished. And even more so, the Israelites are enslaved. And in looking at Stonewall, we have so many different layers of who was present, who was oppressing, who was being oppressed, who was on the front lines versus who made it out unscathed. And yeah, and thinking about like how can compassion and moving forward, right? Like we know the 1 year later, the commemoration was our first Pride Parade. And there was a really big moment in summer of 2019 in which the New York City Police Department put out an official statement apologizing for the actions of the police at Stonewall and at other gay bars. And it was largely rejected by the queer community. And to think of what these different layers and what the different lenses of compassion and growth and learning we can have from these stories is sort of what I'll leave us with today. And then I showed it to you already, but here's our photo of Stonewall in 1969, this like unassuming little bar on Christopher Street.
I passed. This was a completely amazing Torah Queries, and we are so grateful. I have something to ask you if it's possible. Heshi was just diagnosed today with COVID, and we also have on tonight Stephanie, who is recovering from such a serious automobile accident. And I was wondering if you could just say a Mishabera to end Torah Queries tonight.
Absolutely, absolutely. I invite you all to sing along with me, please, as we pray for the healing of both Stephanie and Heshi, and also all those who are suffering with everything in our world. Mi sheberach avotenu v'imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, v'yivarech et hacholim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimele Rachamim Aleichem, L'achlimam L'rapotam L'chazikam, V'yishlach Lachem Mehera Refuah, Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, Hashabagala Uvizman Kariv, V'nomar Amen. Mi sheberach avotenu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Thank you so much, everyone. And before you go, folks, I just put in the chat box a link to an upcoming PRISM event. It's called Count Their Name. What's it called, Ellen? Count Their Names, the Nazi persecution of gay people. It's a program. We have a historian coming in, and we're partnering with the Jewish Holocaust Remembrance Foundation in Philadelphia and JPROUD through JFCS and the JPROUD project of Jewish Family and Children's Services of Greater Philadelphia. We're working on some promotional materials. It's in 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks from Thursday on the 27th, and it's going to be virtual.
January 27th?
What's that?
January 27th.
That's correct. Yep. So I hope you can all join us. We are asking for registration, so it's on the website and the link is in the chat for that. And of course, before that, we have another night with Rabbi Rachel coming up 2 weeks from tonight on the 18th. So we hope to see you all then. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi Rachel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi. That was
Happy
so
New Year.
comforting. Appreciated it.
Rabbi, thank you. This was really interesting tonight.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
I'm glad it worked.
It was great.
Take care, you all.
You too. See you on the
Good night.
18th.
See you on the 18th.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Our service is definitely in person tomorrow, Steve. Friday.
Yes. We only moved last week to online because it was New Year's. It
Okay.
wasn't because of Omicron.
So
So,
you have scheduled to greet.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. You and Carmen.
Okay, so I'll be there.
Yeah, I will be there too. If it changes, I'll let you know.
Okay.
I gotta run. I have a call. Bye.
Yeah.
Hello.